We like to think of games like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Getting Over It, or Cuphead as being hard, but in reality, the hardest game ever created is the game of life. As for roughly 4 billion years, it's been raging on, at least on Earth, and uncountable competitors through that time have risen and fallen. Some swam in the seas, others flew in the sky, and then of course you had those that walked. And in some ways, we are most preoccupied with the walking ones, as we ourselves are terrestrial animals. And this got me wondering, just like how I wondered with the deadliest sea animals from every period, what were the deadliest terrestrial predators from every period? In other words, if each time had a giant battle royale, who would come out on top? And just like my other video about the deadliest sea animals, we'll be starting in the Cambrian period, some 538 million years ago. However, where things get a little different here is that, unlike in the ocean, there were 0 contenders on land for this period. As while, yes, microorganisms lived on land during this time, the planet's landmasses were devoid of animals and plants. The invasion of land had just yet to come. So I guess technically some microorganism was top dog at that time, basically winning by being one of the only things in that race. So, not exactly a thrilling start, and it would take some time for terrestrial life to ramp up. As in the following Ordovician, we see the same problem, because for now there is no conclusive evidence that any fully terrestrial animals were alive at this time either. Now, we do have trackways and footprints on what would be land, but these came from arthropods that didn't spend all their time on land, and needed water to survive. And for that reason, they are disqualified. This said, there is evidence of fungi and plants, which are obviously not animals or predators, but given the circumstances, they can be our honorary deadliest terrestrial life forms. Because I mean, who knows? Some time traveler could have been admiring the Ordovician scenery and then stubbed their toe on some plant matter. So, very dangerous. And with that, we've already blasted through nearly 100 million years, and not a lot has happened. But things were about to get a little more spicy, as next up was the Silurian. At this point, things in the water were already very crazy, and on land, while the scene was still mild, it was infinitely more interesting, as it was during the late Silurian that the very first land animals appeared. But there is a catch here, which is that we don't know explicitly what they were, as the main piece of evidence is trace fossils made by yours truly, the myriapods, a group that still exists today and consists of various arthropods such as millipedes and the nightmare fuel known as centipedes. There is a chance, though debated, that one species which could have been present was a small millipede that lived in what is today Scotland, and was potentially the period's deadliest animal. And even if it wasn't, it was still likely some other millipede-like creature. Yet, in reality, if you came across one of these big shots, it would likely have to worry far more about you than you about it, given their teeny tiny sizes and assumedly detritivorous diet, meaning that it ate dead organic matter, primarily dead plants. Not so scary, I know. And hang tight, because this trend was going to continue for a little bit longer, as the Devonian period, which began about 419 million years ago, was still one of the warm-up stages for terrestrial animals. However, with that said, a new kind of creature was the new sheriff in town. While there were still plenty of myriapods crawling around, land arthropods had also evolving into something known as the trigonotarbids, a now extinct order of rather small critters that appeared at the very end of the Silurian. It can only be described as primitive spiders. And yet, they were not true spiders, although they are now considered arachnids. They were rather a type of arachnids that just awfully resembled a real spider. And I guess that, in a sense, already makes them quite a bit scarier than the myriapods, at least to those with arachnophobia. Yet, despite their similar looks, these guys could not produce silk, and had distinctively segmented abdomens, which were armored by a relatively thick layer of chitin. Across the board, trigonotarbids tended to be fairly small, but there were a few that were big enough that if they landed on you, you'd probably jump out of your skin, with the largest genus, the Chrysacaria, having had a similar body size to that of a golden silk orb weaver. And though not exactly giants, these guys were not happy with the diet of the earlier myriapods, being instead more inclined to umami flavors. In other words, they were killers, and perhaps being the planet's first fully terrestrial predators at that, as they sustained themselves on other invertebrates. And it seems that they actually ate their distant brethren in a way similar to spiders. In other words, using digestive enzymes to, well, liquefy their prey's insides so they could slurp them out like a hearty soup. Delicious. However, unlike other certain spiders, trigonotarbids did not kill by using venom, with the current consensus being that they lacked any, and that they instead had fang-like structures that operated like clasp knives, pinning and piercing their victims. And this seems to have done the trick just fine, as they became quite widespread on the paleocontinent of Laurentia, and would eventually also spread down to Gondwana, which was an impressive feat for the time. But what is even more impressive is that there is a chance that trigonotarbids are responsible for the deadliest land animal from not just one period, but from two. As in the following Devonian, they remained a dominant force on land. And while much evolution had occurred, and was occurring, the world had not yet seen anything leagues above it appear. Now, you may be wondering about things such as the Tiktaalik, the quote-unquote missing link, who lived during this period, which for those who don't know what I'm talking about, was a lobe-finned fish of respectable sizes who preyed on aquatic life and could perhaps support its body on land. However, it doesn't count as it was in no way a fully terrestrial animal, and based on some studies, it might not even have been able to wander on land at all, needing shallow waters at the very least. And the same can be said about another group of would-be contenders, scorpions. Yes, these guys are that old, but the scorpions of the Devonian are not like the ones of today, having been almost exclusively semi or fully aquatic creatures that had gills, which is kind of a darn shame as a few of them would definitely have overthrown the trigonotarbids, such as the Prearcturus, a scorpion from Devonian Britain that even makes modern genera seem tame, as this guy was uncomfortably big, with its body measuring about a foot long. And that, by the way, is going off of fragmented remains. So just imagine the size of this critter's telson and pincers, which are estimated to have been knife-sized, and also acted a lot like knives too, as on top of being used to catch prey, they would also use them to tear them apart as well. Although, like I said, this isn't considered a true contender, as most doubt it could live on land, as it was simply too big for the time, with there being no prey of the right size to sustain it. But I should mention, there is one caveat to the scorpion's case, which is that there is one, and I mean literally one Devonian scorpion specimen, that shows evidence of having lungs, so meaning life on land. And while this specimen is severely fragmented and has never been formally described, it could be viewed as a valid contender, perhaps in the future. And speaking of that, another group we must consider is our old pals, the myriapods, as during the Devonian we saw the arrival of small, but albeit voracious predatorial species, like the Devambius, a carnivorous centipede from New York that was exceptionally small, being less than half an inch long, but still very lethal, proportionally, evolving relatively massive farcipules, which are those pincer-like structures centipedes have, that would have allowed it to prey on animals larger than itself. Yet, my money is still on a large trigonotarbid, and really, the only thing clear here is that the Devonian's land was still comfortably ruled by arthropods, and this wasn't going to change anytime soon, as 358 million years ago, when the Carboniferous began, arthropods weren't just still in the game, they were at their peak. As many of you are probably aware, the Carboniferous is often called the Age of Insects, as the world was covered in coal swamps that were home to bugs, on bugs, on bugs, and of giant sizes too. And while arthropods are not actually insects, they are in my opinion still creepy crawlies, and it was a giant version of one of them who was now calling the shots, and that was the Pulmonoscorpius, emphasis on the Scorpius part, as by now our stinging friends had really leaned into the whole terrestrial life thing, and dominated in these areas above water. Now, yes, there was some pretty nasty stuff lurking in the waters of those swamps as well, including things like predatorial amphibians that would venture onto land occasionally, but if you traveled past the water, the real worry was Pulmonoscorpius, the largest scorpion to have ever lived. This especially grim genus first emerged during the Mississippian subperiod, and was originally found in present-day Scotland. And while Scotland now lacks scorpions, it was loaded with them back then, with this single genus, in my opinion, already being more than enough, with individuals measuring up to 28 inches or 70 centimeters long, possibly more. Which, to put that into perspective, we are essentially talking about a scorpion the size of a large house cat. So, good luck trying to remove that from your house, or swat it with a slipper. Probably wouldn't go over well. And to add fuel to the fire, and trust me, there's a lot of fuel, get it, coal forests, this guy was just like its modern relatives in the fact that it had powerful pincers and a stinger. Only its were supersized, with the stinger alone being roughly the size of your fist. So I can confidently say that I do not need a time machine to tell you that it would absolutely suck to be stung by one. And you also have to remember that it was likely venomous too, considering that all living species of scorpions are venomous to some degree. But with that said, your first thought may be that since large scorpions tend to be less venomous, then this guy must have been safe, relatively. But that could have been a very fatal belief, as what is a more accurate statement is not that larger scorpions tend to be less venomous, it's that scorpions with larger pincers relative to their tails are less venomous. And this scorpion had small pincers relative to its tail, meaning it had small little hands and a giant freaking tail, highlighting the fact that the structure could have been filled with some very potent venom. Of course, we don't know this for sure as, well, venom doesn't fossilize, but we know it had the tools necessary to prey upon other arthropods and tetrapods within the expansive coal forests, and it is often considered an apex predator. However, this ruler was not without competition, as there was a new group that was edging their way towards the throne, the synapsids, who at this time had also produced various predators, but I still don't think any of them could yet take on a large cat-sized, potentially venomous scorpion. However, that would eventually change, as towards the end of the Carboniferous, the rulers of the swamp got a rude awakening, with the onset of the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, which is basically what it sounds like. A relatively minor extinction that had a disproportional impact on the timeline, as it altered the vast coal forests of Earth, and ultimately drastically changing the course of evolution, as now the ecosystems, landscape, and climate were very different. And as such, the Permian, which began about 298 million years ago, which was the next and last period of the Paleozoic era, was vastly different than the Carboniferous. But this was also the first period, in my opinion at least, that life on land was truly crazy, as rapid diversification of both amniotes and synapsids had occurred, creating a wide range of new life, and bringing the Deadliest animal game to whole new heights. Through the Permian, this included groups like the Therocephalians and Sphenacodons. But of all the new faces to appear, the one that became the most widespread, or at least the most famous, were the Gorgonopsids, a group of non-mammalian synapsids that attained quite impressive sizes for what has been seen so far, with some reaching the sizes of large cats. And when I say large cat this time, I really do mean the big cats, with them weighing around 300 kilograms, or 660 pounds, while then also developing devastating saber teeth that allow them to pierce deep into tough, skinned fauna. However, while these guys were definitely the kings of the late Permian, I do believe there is one animal that existed earlier on that would have taken them all in a 1v1, and this would be the Ankylosaurus. Existing during the Middle Permian, about 264 million years ago, the Ankylosaurus was just one, but the mightiest member of the lesser-known Ankylosauridae family, a group of dinocephalians characterized by long bodies, thick and wide chests, and proportionally massive skulls consisting of a whole lot of bone, which also supported a wide range of teeth, making them just as deadly as any Gorgonopsid. Yet, unlike our saber-toothed pals, these guys did not have saber teeth, with them instead relying on shorter canines but a much more powerful bite force that came from their giant skulls and jaw muscles, allowing them to both pierce and crush prey. It has also been hypothesized that its pronounced head also lended value in competition amongst its own, allowing it to headbutt competitors instead of biting, which interestingly might have led to a high fatality rate in the species. And this big head syndrome, so you could say, was most pronounced in the Ankylosaurus, as of all the family species, it was the biggest, with large specimens measuring some 6 meters or 20 feet, and weighing possibly 600 kilos or over 1,300 pounds, making it comparable to a fair-sized male Kodiak bear, a stark contrast from our cat-sized scorpion just one period prior. And thanks to this size, Ankylosaurus wasn't only an apex predator in its environment, it was also downright the largest terrestrial predator from the Permian we know of yet, giving it absolutely full reign during its existence. And it mainly exercised this power within the South African part of Pangaea, while then evidence does also show that the Ankylosaurus possibly had a presence in Russia too, which would thus reflect a global range. At the time, these areas were marked by frequent and vast rivers that created plenty of alluvial plains, marshes, lakes, woods, and forests that all went to support this king. Though, despite its monstrous design, it would not see the late Permian, as, per tradition, it was taken out by an extinction event. Specifically, the Capetanian extinction, one that was perhaps caused by volcanic activity, and would therefore once again open the door for a new king. Although in comparison, the Capetanian seems incredibly mild, as at the end of the Permian, something known as the Great Dying occurred, which would, let's say, reset the competition, as that event utterly decimated life, eradicating over 95% of species, and changing the game drastically as Earth entered the Triassic. And you may be thinking, an extinction this bad must have set the terrestrial predators way back. And for a bit, it did. But if you look at the whole of the Triassic, you'll quickly realize that the size train did not stop, and it actually started to speed up fast as the later stages approached. Thus, while the early Triassic was somewhat lacking, there were a lot of deadly predators towards the end, including a group you all know and love, the dinosaurs, who were about to go on a monstrous rampage. Yet, with this said, contrary to what you might believe, the deadliest animal during the Triassic was not a dinosaur. They would need to wait a little bit longer. No, instead the deadliest creature around these days was a four-legged kaiju that did look like it could be some kind of dinosaur, but wasn't, and is so far the largest non-dinosaur predator to ever walk, and that would be the Phaseolasuchus. At the time, Pangaea was still intact, and it had taken up residence in what would one day become Argentina, a place rich in alluvial plains, meandering rivers, floodplains, and walking nightmares. Many of said nightmares were now reptiles, but of all the reptilian horrors, the Phaseolasuchus was by far the worst. And honestly, it's not that surprising given its classification, as we believe it to have been a pseudosuchian, and more specifically, a Rauisuchid, an informal group of typically large hypercarnivorous apex predators that have produced many infamous members, such as the Postosuchus, a genus made popular by walking with dinosaurs, that also painted it as the top dog of the Triassic. And while this was true for its time, it was definitely not for the Phaseolasuchus' time, who was younger, but also the bigger sibling. Or should I say, giant sibling. For now, it's primarily known from two specimens, one that was about the same size as a giant saltwater croc, while the other was only comparable to large theropods, as it measured a staggering 10 meters or 33 feet from head to tail, making it longer than even your average Allosaurus, one of the most successful theropods of the entire Jurassic. And get this, it may have had it beat in the weight department as well, with some estimating it to have weighed around 3 tons, which is a whole lot of predator. And of course, this stature meant that it was also rocking a titanic head that would have been over half the size of your entire body and lined with long, recurved and serrated teeth that would have sliced through flesh like a hot knife, causing massive injury and blood loss. And just to remind you, this thing was a quadruped, so imagine something like a croc, only much bigger, running towards you at speeds that would make you hope you were wearing brown pants, if you get my drift. And so clearly it had a lot of killing power, but then just to complete the package, it also had a ton of defensive power, as it sported a robust skeletal structure and homegrown armor made up of osteoderms, i.e. bony deposits that ran down its back and tail, which unsurprisingly, when combining this into one prehistoric nightmare, allowed the Phaseolasuchus to virtually kill anything it encountered and caught, including the largest animals to ever walk, sauropods, such as the Lesiomosaurus, who while not having yet to reach the sizes seen in later descendants, was still massive, weighing up to 12 metric tons itself. And yet regardless, paleontologists believe that Phaseolasuchus could not only take one of these guys down, but was in fact designed to take them down, perhaps by first targeting their legs, and then afterwards, once immobilized, their vulnerable underside and other parts. Now, if you were observant, you may have noticed that the Phaseolasuchus is our first reptile on the list, but it will be by no means the last, as now they had their foot in the door, and they were not going to be budging anytime soon. I mean, they weren't even stopped by the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, which occurred towards the end of the period, which also once again decimated the entire planet. During it, many reptiles were erased, including the Phaseolasuchus and all of its fellow Rauisuchians, but there was one group that actually stood to benefit from this event, and that was of course, the dinosaurs, who survived and spent very little time taking over, very quickly establishing one of the longest dynasties of any known animal group ever, expanding across the entire planet and evolving into 3 diverse groups: sauropods, ornithischians, and then the theropods, who single-handedly brought us the largest land predators of all time. But that begs the question of which was the deadliest of the Jurassic? And frankly, I think this one is a tie, as there are 2 Jurassic predators that were so insane and lethal that I feel compelled to mention them both, and that would be the aforementioned Allosaurus and Torvosaurus, 2 massive theropods that were the Jurassic's top predators. And while over the years there have been rumors of specimens and species that possibly rivaled these guys, almost every time this happened, these so-called mysterious specimens have just turned out to be either an unusually large Torvosaurus or an unusually large Allosaurus, which says a lot. Now, each of them existed for an extended amount of time and spread throughout multiple continents, becoming top predators in a myriad of environments, including, by the way, some of the harshest to ever form. But what many people don't realize is because of their range, long existence in various environments, not every Allosaurus and Torvosaurus was made the same, with multiple different species evolving, which for comparison is kind of like how the genus Panthera has species like the tiger and lion, but then also the leopard, which to the naked eye look a lot different and are also a lot different in formidability. And of all of these species, the standouts are Torvosaurus gruneyi and the Allosaurus anax. Both of these species produce specimens which suggest lengths up to 12 meters or 39 feet long, possibly even a bit more. Where they differed though was body type, with the Torvosaurus being more of a stout powerhouse, whilst the Allosaurus was built for agility, and as such the gruneyi might have weighed almost 5 tons, while then the Allosaurus anax hovered around 4.6. But don't let that fool you, because when it came down to deadliness, both were neck and neck, just for different reasons. You see, the anax had dozens of sharp, recurved, and double-sided serrated teeth that killed through a slash and slice mechanism without needing a powerful bite, while then it also possessed massive arms equipped with claws the size of your forearm, allowing it to cause blood loss on its prey like a blood priest out of Elden Ring. Then the Torvosaurus, on the other hand, had a much more robust and powerful bite, thanks to its broader and deep skull, that killed largely by crushing through large amounts of bone and flesh. So in other words, it's not if these guys can kill you, but rather how. And so, given just how deadly each was, and their very similar sizes, I reckon a fight between the two would come down to who got the jump on who first, along with the size difference in the involved individuals. What is very clear though is that neither could really get rid of the other, as surprisingly, Torvosaurus and Allosaurus actually had a long history of coexisting with one another, which really just goes to show that these guys were some tough cookies, as no matter how the ecosystems of the time were, both of them were absolutely gonna be there. And thus, until the waning days of the Jurassic, Torvosaurus and Allosaurus were both undisputed apex predators. But not even this duo could beat Father Time and Mother Nature, as while there was no mass extinction event, the Tithonian, i.e. the last stage of the period, did have a minor extinction that disproportionately affected some groups more than others, and it seems that these two were likely included in the former rather than the latter. Don't you worry though, because theropods as a whole were just getting started. And going into the Cretaceous, they would somehow reach new heights again, giving us some of the most famous predators to ever live, despite being at this point millions of years old. And let me tell you, the competition was fierce, and really fiercer than ever before. And to really drive this point home, just think of it this way. Neither the Torvosaurus or Allosaurus, despite being the champs of the Jurassic, would be considered in the top 5 largest Cretaceous theropods. You had the massive Giganotosaurus from Argentina, the Spinosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus from Africa, the Tarbosaurus from Asia, and the list goes on. Yet, of all the Cretaceous predators, you do have to give the title to the one. And you know exactly who I'm talking about. The one they literally call the king of dinosaurs, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. For some, this animal may feel overhyped with all of its media attention and talk, but in reality, it's earned every single ounce of its legacy. For this monstrous creature was basically death walking on 2 legs. Appearing in North America at the very end of the Cretaceous, about 68 million years ago, the T-Rex was a member of, and the last iteration of, a tyrannosaur. And in its case, unlike the 3rd season of a show, you could say that here, newer was better, as everything about the T-Rex was absolutely insane. Superficially, one could take it for just another large theropod. But this could not be further from the truth, as it had evolved to take down some of the deadliest herbivores within their own right. As we know, it preyed on the large and fearsome Triceratops, the titanic sauropod Alamosaurus, the Edmontosaurus, which was one of, if not tied for the largest hadrosaur, and then possibly the armored tank himself, the Ankylosaurus. And unsurprisingly, it was able to get away with this thanks to a trove of overpowered traits, one of the foremost and most important being the size. Now, the T-Rex was not the longest theropod to ever evolve, but it did come pretty close, with large individuals measuring some 13 meters or 43 feet long. And that is long, but the real magic was in its weight, as the Rex was built like a freaking Abrams, sporting massive robust bones, a barrel of a chest that would put any bodybuilder to shame, and titanic legs, which all led to it being the heaviest theropod of all time, with big specimens weighing between 9 and 10 tons, while then extremely exceptional individuals have been found to weigh possibly 12 tons. Let me just point out that this is just off of what we have found, as a team in 2024 reckoned that somewhere out there is a 15-ton Rex just waiting to be unearthed, which for perspective is like 15 record-sized polar bears all assembled into one killer package. And as the saying goes, with great size comes great bite. Or at least that's the story for the Tyrannosaurus, who had a skull that somehow almost seemed too big for its already giant body. And it was this skull, and the attached muscles in life, that gave it a bite that essentially killed an animal by making it explode. Specifically, the T-Rex possessed numerous banana-shaped large teeth that could come down at forces nearly 57,000 newtons, so enough to pulverize bones, organs, flesh, and if it wanted to, literally tear through a car. And given that its skull alone in life might have weighed more than a bear, and was nearly as long as a person, it could definitely deliver lethal damage to most dinosaurs in one fell swoop. And surprise, surprise, we've seen this damage in action, as numerous dinosaurs have been found with definitive bite marks that usually appear as mashed up bones. It also seems that based on some evidence, that given their massive bite force, a T-Rex would often just bite the head of an animal whole, and essentially, I guess, pop the giant skull like a gusher. Instant lights out. And though those tiny arms might not look like much, they did have a role too, as they were deceivingly powerful and muscular, which in turn means they could have been used to hold animals in place to deliver said gusher head bite. Yet with that said, the really impressive thing about the Rex wasn't just that it was a big brute. Well, to be honest, that was a very impressive thing about the Rex. But no, another impressive thing I should say, was that it was a calculated, fine-tuned hunter who had an impeccable sense of smell and vision, despite what you might have heard from Jurassic Park. it was also not all brawn, no brains, seeing that the endocast of its brain revealed a remarkably advanced brain for a large theropod, which suggested a higher level of intelligence than many other competitors of the time, such as, for example, Giganotosaurus or Carcharodontosaurus. And this was somewhat due to its classification as a Coelurosaur, a group of theropods partially known for heightened intelligence compared to carnosaurs. And so when you go to combine all of these traits together, you get a nigh unstoppable force of nature, one that might have scared Mother Nature silly herself, as just 2 million years after the emergence, the reign of the dinosaurs was cut short by an asteroid, which sounds like a lot of coincidence to me. And with that, it also ended the Mesozoic and began the Cenozoic with the Paleogene, ushering in the Age of Mammals. Ironically though, this moniker is somewhat misleading, as while mammals did rapidly diversify and spread throughout the planet, the deadliest land predator was arguably still a reptile, just not a dinosaur, instead being a crocodilomorph unlike any today, the Brionosuchus. Hailing from South America, this thing superficially looked a lot like the Phaseolotsuchus of old, and ironically it was also a Pseudotsuchian, yet being very unrelated to the ancient giant, with it instead being a Sebekid instead of a Rauisuchian, which had gone extinct like I mentioned. And the Sebekids are a group colloquially known as land crocodiles, and were some of the most dominant predators of the entire Cenozoic. And of said dominant predators, the Brionosuchus was king. So far, it's considered the largest genus of Sebekid, and was able to reach sizes that seem almost impossible for the Cenozoic, with some estimating lengths up to 10 meters or 33 feet long. That said, recent studies do think this may be a tad generous, and in recent years, there have been new ranges in size, with many including quite large margins of error. But regardless, everyone still agrees on one thing, and that was this guy was giant, and big individuals likely weighed over 1 ton, possibly close to 2 tons, so heavier than any predatory land mammal that we know of. This alone made it a menace, but to really secure the crown and title as the true apex predator, Brionosuchus pulled a Hannah Montana, and by that I mean it took the best of both worlds. Those worlds being from large theropods and crocodiles. From the theropods it matched their teeth, possessing zyphodon teeth, which is a tooth design seen in many large theropods, and meant that unlike modern crocs that puncture and grip, these guys were designed to fillet the heck out of megafauna. But then on the flip side, like crocodiles, they were likely armored, possessing plates and osteoderms, while then also being quadrupeds instead of bipedal. Though make no mistake, you would not catch these guys lurking in the lake, as they were 100% terrestrial and had elongated limbs that allowed them to freaking sprint prey down, all the while again looking like a giant croc. That said though, Brionosuchus did like water, as it has often been associated with vast lake expanses and ever-reaching marshlands, where it would have terrorized both reptiles and mammals alike. There is just one caveat to the Brionosuchus though, and it has to do with time. You see, this guy was seriously long-lived, appearing over 40 million years ago and only dying out about 11 million years ago, meaning it existed in both the Paleogene and Neogene, i.e. the following period. And the thing is, the specimens known from the Paleogene are quite different from the Neogene ones, being notably smaller. And it's not really clear why, if it was a juvenile, a different species, etc. And thus there's a chance that maybe it wasn't really the deadliest. And if you do remove it from the contenders, the competition actually significantly increases, with a few pretty good choices left over. One of which would have been another fellow Sebekid, the Dentanosuchus, a European genera that was Europe's largest Cenozoic land predator ever, measuring between 3 meters and 6 meters long, while then also possessing many similar characteristics of Brionosuchus, i.e. armor, nasty bite, ability to make me scream like a little baby. You get the picture. You then also had, fittingly, given the whole Age of Mammals thing, some pretty ferocious mammals too, like the Hyaenodon gigas, a highly cursorial apex predator from the mid-Paleogene that was significantly larger than the average lion or tiger. Another possible choice was the famed Andrewsarchus, a strange mammal from China that was possibly related to the hell pigs, and is well known for having had an absurdly giant skull. Yet, to be honest, that's kind of all we know, that it had a big old bobblehead. And because of this, we don't know how big it truly was. It did also lack meat-slicing carnassial teeth that you tend to see in hypercarnivores, while then its molars also pointed directly towards an omnivorous or scavenging lifestyle. But again, there's a lot of mystery surrounding the creature, so for now it is hard to say how it competes in this argument. And overall, the duration of the Brionosuchus doesn't only create questions for the Paleogene, it also does for the preceding Neogene too, which began 23 million years ago. Because as I mentioned, this is the period where the truly giant specimens come from, and as such, we're looking at a genus that potentially is a back-to-back deadliest land animal winner, which is pretty insane. But as I just said, this is the Age of Mammals after all, we deserve a consolation prize. And regardless, there is actually one species from this period that would definitely put up a good fight against the Brionosuchus. and its name was the Arctotherium angustidens. This was an elephant of a bear that appeared roughly 1 million years ago during the Middle Pleistocene. It is a member of the still extant short-faced bears, and though its ancestors hailed from North America, they eventually made their way down south during the Great American Interchange, after which the angustidens evolved, a travesty for many South American animals, as this bear wasn't only deadly, it was also an absolute unit, being the largest known bear so far. For a long time, it was only speculated that exceptionally large angustidens would have weighed anywhere from half a ton to a hefty 1.2 tons, which for reference already surpasses the weight of a polar bear. But then in 2011, an extraordinarily large male was located in Argentina. Guess there's something in the water over there. And this extraordinarily large male, they said, blew past all expectations, as this guy seems to have weighed anywhere from 1.5 tons to over 2 tons in weight, which is literally heavier than your average Allosaurus. And at this size, researchers have said that when rearing, it would have been about 4.3 meters or 14.1 feet tall, making it about as tall as the average female giraffe. Now there are bears out there that are plenty of big and really scary, but consume a lot more plants than meat, in some cases almost being strict vegans. And this actually included some of the angustidens' sister species. Yet it was basically Ron Swanson, a die-hard meat eater. As while it was technically omnivorous, isotope analysis on its teeth and the design of its skull suggests that it had a high preference for large quantities of meat, and actively preyed on animals, using its gargantuan size and paws to pin animals down before delivering bites to their neck and back, and thus obviously killing them. And just given its overall size and strength, it's thought that the angustidens was more than capable of hunting horses, glyptodons, giant ground sloths, which were freaking massive, toxodontids, and even gomphotheres, also freaking massive. And it wasn't just a killer, but also a fighter too, with aged specimens often showing signs of having multiple deep, albeit healed, injuries that suggested a life of conflict with one another, and possibly other predators as well. And don't even think for 1 second that you could hide from one of these guys, as it tended to inhabit open plains, grasslands, and steppes, which offered very little coverage for its prey. The only silver lining, to be honest, was that it was a seasonal terror, likely practicing some form of hibernation, which is highlighted by remains recovered from paleo burrows and caves, which is just yet another reason why I would never step foot in a cave in prehistoric Earth. And honestly, probably now. Alas, just like many of the Earth's greatest predators, Mother Nature eventually said no to this Goliath of a bear as well. And as the Neogene came to a close, it vanished. And with that, we finally arrived to the present, the Quaternary period. And all I have to say about this period is, if you want to know the deadliest predator walking around at this moment, and possibly of all time, drop a like, subscribe, and then go find yourself a mirror. Thanks for watching, and until next time, on ExtinctZoo.